about to start and have a conversation about the universe and all its complications. Step right in, we've been waiting for you to say that you're confuddled. Ba-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da. Yeah, we've been waiting for you, waiting for you.
Hello, you're listening to Confuddled, the podcast where we're craving after that last little slice of the pie of truth. It's the podcast where we talk about philosophy, we talk about the deep and meaningful, and we try to have a few laughs along the way. I'm Alex, and...
That was good. That was good. I'm Azul, and here's how it works. Every week we have a new topic, but only this week's host knows what it is. This week, as you must have gathered, I'm the host, and Alex has
Hello.
no idea what we're going to talk about.
Absolutely no idea as usual.
So I love doing this every single time, making you guess what we're going to talk about.
I love, that you make me have to guess what we're talking. Well, it's good fun because I'm like a child. I like games.
Oh yeah, I did not know this. I say sarcastically.
See, the fact that you had to say sarcastically means you haven't mastered sarcasm, because it should be heard through the voice.
Yeah, I get this a lot. I say things sarcastically, but everybody thinks I'm being literal, and then hilarity ensues, really.
Always. And that's what we want. We want more hilarity.
We do.
We do. And that's what we aim to bring you, our lovely listeners.
So, what do you think we're talking about?
Right. So I have to get, okay, you haven't officially asked the question yet, but...
No, I'm officially asking you, what do you think we were going to talk about this week?
Okay, so this week, I think it's something very odd and strange. I think it involves maybe people having weird desires after things, like goals people have that are just really odd. And like maybe we're going to talk about ambition.
So I may use this for the next podcast idea, but
Okay.
no, not even close, to be perfectly fair.
Okay.
Today we're going to try, and I say try, but I am egotistical enough to say that I have successfully proven that Shakespeare was wrong.
About what?
About a rose.
He was wrong about a rose.
Yes.
Now, you got to tread carefully here, because my brother is an academic who knows Shakespeare's work very well, and he's passed on his passion for Shakespeare to me.
I see.
So I'm kind of scared here. My heart's beating.
Well, don't get me wrong, I love Shakespeare.
Yeah, I'm really glad that we actually still enjoy Shakespeare today. Even though, it was written hundreds of years ago, it's still relevant.
I know, it's amazingly relevant, and I love... It is hard, and I completely sympathize with people finding it hard, but I think once you get past the hardness, it does have so much to it, and like bad jokes, good jokes, random jokes, all the jokes.
And that what you just said applies to many different things. So with that, let's talk about the rose. What's the rose got to do with it?
Yes, of course. I'm sure all of you have heard of, and I'm sure you, Alex, have heard of Romeo and Juliet. And
yes.
Within this play, there was the pivotal line, "That which we call a rose, by any other name, would smell as sweet."
My brain has got to wrap my head around that line again. So that which we call a rose, by any other name, would still smell as sweet.
Yes.
What is it saying there? Is it saying if we call a rose something else, then it'd still smell like a rose?
So, essentially what Shakespeare was meaning by his sentence of rose and so on, what Juliet said is that regardless of Romeo being of the opposite family, the family that they are at war with, he's still the Romeo that she loves. And so just because of his name, it doesn't necessarily change who he is to her.
Okay.
So
yeah. So it's just a label.
Exactly.
So it's talking about labels and what's really meaningful.
Yeah, exactly. And so just because, Alex, your name would change to Dormouse, let's say, you would still be Alex, right? Because you embody Alex, and just because your name changes...
But I reckon I'd start having, quite a liking to cheese all of a sudden.
So it's interesting that you say that. So today we're trying, or successfully succeeding, to prove that Shakespeare was wrong. And in fact, a rose by any other name would not be a rose and would not smell anything similar to
So
a
you're
rose.
saying is that a label makes the thing?
I'm going to posit some theories and interesting factoids from
Posit
here and
away,
there.
my friend.
Yes, well, we'll start with something called the name letter effect. So we're starting small, right? So let's start in an area that we can all relate to. There was a study done in 1985 by a Belgian experimental psychologist named Joseph Nutting.
Was he a bit of a nutter? I'm sorry, I couldn't resist.
I was waiting for
Or was
that.
he up to nutting much?
Well, he was up to a lot actually. So,
Okay.
yeah, he found that if you were to give individuals a random assortment of letters and another random assortment of letters that had all of the letters in your name and ask these individuals to choose the preferential list, they would almost always, or like there was a higher chance of them choosing the list that had the letters in their name.
Okay.
So he actually thought about it like one day, one sunny morning, I imagine, he was driving along a road and he saw a license plate in front of him and he thought, hey, hang on a bit, I would prefer to have a license plate with the letters of my name. And that led to him thinking, perhaps this is an unconscious bias and perhaps I prefer letters that are in my name. So he basically put this to the test and he essentially gave people lists of letters and asked them to choose what their preferred letter was. So he would give you, for example, Alex, he would give the letter A, the letter L, the letter Z, Q, W in one group, and then he would give the letter J, W, Y, and Q, for lack of a better thing. And then he would ask you to choose which is the best or the better or preferential group of letters. And he found more often than not that you or the common person would choose the bunch of letters that had your letters in it.
Well, yeah. Well, I think that's because we've spent our lives being called a name, and we build an identity around our name. But then again, this addresses the question of who are you? Who am I? Because what Shakespeare's saying there in that line is that this label that we identify with, this name, doesn't make me who I am. I am someone before I have a name. I mean, when you're born, you don't have a name, but you're still someone. Until, I mean, for the first few moments, you don't have a name.
Yeah.
Right?
That's fair, yeah.
Yeah. But then, are you suggesting that Shakespeare... Because you're wanting to prove Shakespeare wrong.
I am, yes.
You fool.
I love it. I was so confident in it as well.
Yeah. You arrogant fool.
Well, let's dig a bit deeper, because you are valid just because you have a inherent preference towards the letters of your name doesn't really mean anything, right?
Yeah.
But we're starting, so this is what I meant by we're starting small. So we're starting with implicit preferences. So
Give me something bigger, man. Give me something bigger. Bring it on.
So just to prove that this isn't just an English thing, they actually conducted this study in 15 different languages, including Spanish, Japanese, Dutch, Finnish, French, and so on. And they found the same factors affecting everybody. And so this is a pretty international, pretty like regardless of culture and nationality and regardless of language kind of effect. And in fact, they found that this effect was the same if you asked to rank like one or two letters together or to compare two random letters. It always came down to your inherent preferences, right?
Right.
But sure, this doesn't really prove anything, and this doesn't really...
Not at all.
Yeah.
I remain firmly in the Shakespeare is right camp.
That's fair enough, and I totally understand that. And I just want you to embrace the idea that I'm positing here, that individual letter can have a different, for lack of a better word, meaning to different people. So you may like the letter X because Alex has an X, and I may like the letter Z because Azul has a Z, even though technically those letters really have nothing to do with each other, even though I would say I prefer Z over X and you would prefer X over Z, for example. Like, this is just perception, right?
Okay.
That's what I want to draw your attention to, at least.
Right.
So moving on from here, we come into another experiment done in 2003 by an MIT cognitive scientist. But in 2003 by a MIT cognitive scientist named, and again, apologies if I'm butchering these names, Lera Boroditsky. And she was a MIT cognitive scientist who in 2003 published a study about bridges.
Bridges?
Yes. What's the Spanish word for bridge?
Puente.
Could you give me 3 words that you associate with that word in English with that Spanish word?
Pontificate?
What? Why?
Because it sounds like puente. Pontificate,
Ah.
I guess. I'm just thinking randomly, and I just, when I say puente, I literally just think of a bridge as well. And I think of 2 points being met by one thing, so that's not a word. That's not a word.
what does it invoke in you? Give me like 3 words that you would use to describe this puente.
Just puente in English.
Yes. So the words that you're using to describe the Spanish word in English.
How do I describe? So I'm just describing letters.
Well, you're describing a bridge, but you're describing the bridge from a Spanish point of view. So you would think of it in this way. Think of Spanish descriptive words for it and then convert it in English.
Okay, well, I guess it'd be the same as it would be in English.
Go for it.
Firm,
Yep.
connection,
Yep.
and through.
Through.
Well, not through. Over.
Okay.
Yeah.
It didn't. This experiment didn't work as well as I would have liked it to with you.
Oh, okay.
So it's interesting that you mentioned the word firm. Your first word was firm, was it not?
Yeah.
So Lera Boroditsky in 2003 created an experiment where she brought English German speakers and English Spanish speakers and asked them to describe a picture of a bridge, using 3 words. So
Yeah.
basically the same experiment I gave you, but they weren't given the actual word. They were just shown a picture of a bridge. It's the same
Okay,
identical
okay.
bridge. And then they were asked to describe the bridge using the 3 words that they feel embodies this bridge the most. Interestingly enough, the Spanish speakers came up with words such as strong, dangerous, long, sturdy, big. You can see a pattern here. All of these words are somewhat masculine, shall we say, because el puente is a masculine word. On the other hand, the German word for bridge, which is die Brücke, is a feminine word, and the words that the German speakers came up with were completely different. They were words such as fragile or elegant, beautiful, slender, and pretty.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and it was just literally the change of this idea behind this word. It's the same picture, the same concept, the same ideas, but just because you had different languages, or perhaps more accurately, just because the bridge was a feminine word versus a masculine word.
Well, the thing that interests me is, as an English speaker, since you have no gender, referring to objects as you do in those languages, how does that affect an English speaker describing something?
So my understanding from the study was that they were all bilingual at least, so they could speak English and Spanish or English and German fluently. And even though they were predominantly at that point in time English speakers insofar as they were at MIT or working in America speaking English, they still had that German or Spanish idea behind those words.
Because that was their first language originally.
Exactly.
Okay.
Curiously, just to try this out even more, they decided to interview Spanish German speakers, so speakers who spoke both Spanish and German fluently,
Okay.
as well as English, so trilinguals.
That would be confusing.
essentially.
Yeah.
Yes, and they found that dependent on how fluent they were with whatever language, the words that they used would change. So if I was one of the experimentees and I was more fluent in Spanish than German, then the words I would choose would be more masculine. But if I was more fluent in German than Spanish, then the words I would choose were feminine.
Interesting. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So they found that just the language being used or being thought of, or the language you use to perceive the world around you, causes these changes in basically everything. So the bridge you see is not the bridge I see, essentially.
Yeah, in a sense, yeah, I guess. Yeah. So are you arguing for subjectivity here?
Yeah, I'm basically arguing for subjectivity from the idea of language, yes?
Okay.
So you can see the idea being created out of this, the idea that your rose is not my rose, essentially.
Right.
But this is just the tip of the iceberg, shall we say.
Okay.
Next, we come to another experiment, and I can't actually show this to you, viewers, but I'll post it up on our descriptions and you can try it out on yourself. So, Alex, I'm going to show you 2 images, and I'm
Okay.
going to tell you 2 words, and I want you to choose which word resonates with which image.
So, you're giving me 2 images and 2 words, and I pick which word associate with which image.
Yes, obviously because of the fact that I primed you a bit, because we're talking about language and stuff like that,
Yeah.
you may choose differently, and so we'll see if this works out. If it doesn't work out, it's still valid, but
Oh, I think
Alex
it'll
is
work.
just an exception.
I'm a lab rat. I feel like I'm in like a psychologist's like experiment or something.
I know, this is exciting.
What do you see? Look at these ink blots. What do you see?
Okay, so the 2 words are maluma
Maluma.
and taketi.
Okay. So
Or-
they're not words that mean anything to me.
No, they're
Okay.
just arbitrary
They
words.
sound Polynesian, but
I have no idea. Essentially, maluma and taketi or
Takete.
and these are the 2 shapes.
Right. Well, instantly Maluma Takete.
Exactly.
Because that Maluma sounds more feminine, and that first shape is rather what I'm describing here. The first shape is basically two weirdly drawn circles intersecting. And that, to me, I don't know, I think of that as more feminine because there's not hard, sharp edges. So I think of that as Maluma. And Takeshi, because of the hard sound in that sounds more masculine to me and hard. And so the other image next to it, it looks almost like a weirdly shaped pentagram. So it's just lots of really hard edges and corners. And so that seems harder. So I feel like it fits Takeshi. So that's my reasoning behind it.
Well, you're not alone because most people in the study also agreed with your opinion. And so it comes down to the idea that certain phrases and sounds change your perception of otherwise pointless words. Like quite literally the words that I spoke to you were just gibberish. They were made up with the sole purpose of making you choose what they want you to choose. So the intention behind those words were for you to choose what you just chose.
Yeah.
How does it feel knowing that you did not have free will behind the choice?
That's okay. We can talk about free will some other time. But, that's... do we really have free will? That'll be a good topic for another time, eh?
That is fair, yeah. But the idea that I'm trying to get into is a mere sound can change what you perceive of an object.
Okay.
Even though that sound does not necessarily have a meaning per se.
So this is what I'm taking away so far, is that even though now this is how you've made me progress. So even though labels don't determine what a thing is, it does affect our perception of a thing, of an object, and that can really influence how we interact with the world around us, really, because everything is seen through this lens of language. Yes.
So far, correct me if I'm wrong in transcribing what you just said. So your conclusion so far is labels affect the way we see the world, or?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's exactly where I want you, and I've got you cornered exactly where I want you.
Oh no.
So we go to the final interesting experiment to blow Alex's mind. This is the experiment that solidifies the idea that Shakespeare was wrong.
I highly doubt this, but go ahead.
Very well.
You fool. You cannot prove Shakespeare wrong.
So another scientist, Yelena Georgievic, I do not know, I couldn't find a reference to where she works currently, but I know that this was quite recent. I think it was in 2007.
Okay.
So in 2007, Yelena Georgievic and a few other experimenters from all over the world, I imagine, came up with an experiment to decide, using the scientific method, whether a rose by any other name would smell as sweet.
Oh, brilliant. That's amazing.
Yes, indeed.
Oh.
2007, ladies and gentlemen. So
I'm feeling like an idiot right now because I feel like I'm going to be scientifically disproven. And I was so confident in Shakespeare.
So they used around 40 participants and used 15 different scents. So 15 different odors, essentially. And they divided the 40 participants into 3 categories. Or 2 categories. I don't exactly remember the experiment off the top of my head. But the idea was that they would show the name of a scent. So they would say, this is the scent of rotten vegetables.
Yeah.
And you would smell it.
Yeah.
And then you would rate it according to how positive it was. And your heart rate, your conductance, which is essentially your skin conductance, like the sweat on your skin, I imagine.
Yeah.
And how much sniffing you did were recorded.
Okay.
And they found that the same smell would have a higher heart rate, a higher sniffing percentage, and a higher rating of niceness, shall we say, if the word describing it, if the label was a more positive sounding label.
Right. Well, the only reason it's a negative sounding label is because it was associated with that object to begin with.
What do you mean?
The only reason they associate the label rotten vegetables as a bad thing is because that label is associated with the object itself.
Yeah, but the scent was identical.
Yeah, the first time, but then after that, that label, what you're saying, was like, whenever they use that same label on something else, on another smell, did they still smell rotten vegetables?
Well, it's not that so rotten vegetables was a bad example. I think they would use things like caramelized carrot as an example, or moldy veggies, or something that you can't really think of a smell for it.
Right,
instantly,
so
but
something new.
That has a negative connotation with just the label itself, right?
Okay.
And then they also used a neutral describer, which was essentially a 2-digit number, so 23, label 23, shall we say.
Okay.
And so they found that conclusively if the label was negatively connotated, regardless of what the smell was, positive or negative, you would have a lower positive reaction to it.
Right.
But if it was a positive label, you would have a higher reaction, like positive reaction to it, regardless of what the smell was. And if it was a neutral label, just a number, you would have a reaction that was between the two.
You're kidding. That's amazing.
Right? And I love how at the end of their experiment, at the very end of their paper, they essentially concluded that a rose by any other name would not smell as sweet because it would have a different name and therefore a different connotation, and therefore everything would be different.
No! Well, that just throws objectivism into the trash.
Well, yeah, the idea behind it is language is subjective. And so, to quote the authors of the study, a rose by the name of rotting flower would not smell as sweet as if it were introduced as fresh rose. And it would smell stronger and less invigorating.
Yeah, but then I would argue against that in the sense that, yes, but then the only reason we have those connotations with those words is because of experiences we've had and associations we've had previously to other things that they point to. So really, originally, objectivism is taken out of the trash and put back in.
You say this,
yeah.
but... And you're totally correct.
Yeah.
You are totally valid. Obviously, these experiences are all affected by previous assumptions of whatever we're feeling in our experiences.
Yeah.
But think of what Shakespeare was trying to say with a rose by any other name. He was trying to say, or we imagine he was trying to say, that just because Romeo was of the opposite family does not mean that he would be any different. But then think about it. The Capulets had a negative connotation to their Montagues for their whole lives, and the Montagues had a negative connotation to the Capulets for their whole lives.
Yeah, but then even though those, Romeo and Juliet grew up in those conditions, it didn't affect them falling in love with each other.
That is true. The story remains as romantic or as disturbing as you would like to take it as.
Yeah.
But his statement, if Romeo's name was different, does not remain valid because it would change how she would have seen Romeo, really.
It was called, Derek.
Yeah. Who
something.
would want to date a Derek? Sorry, Derek.
Or Sean. Sean should be like, ooh, Sean. Hello, Sean.
Honestly, all I can think of is sheep when you say Sean.
Yeah. Well, you did have quite a woolly head.
That's true.
But that what you're saying also makes me think of something I read on quantum physics, which basically says that there's no, I might be wrong, but from a book, I've read one book on quantum physics, but basically this was saying how there's no such thing as objectivity. Everything is subjective. It's like a universal subjectivity, I think.
Right.
I'm not sure if I'm explaining it correctly, but it was something along those lines, and I think, that's what it brings to mind.
It's the idea that whatever we see and perceive is by default, by definition, subjective because we see and perceive it. We don't really see reality as you.
Yeah, it's all because they're saying the core of reality, I think, is consciousness. So then consciousness sees everything. So then it's always seen through consciousness. So there's no such thing as true objectivity. I think that's what it's saying.
Exactly.
Something along those lines. I might be wrong, so please correct us if we're wrong. But
fair enough.
Yeah.
What is your favorite nut?
What is my favorite nut?
Yes.
I've got to say, quite fond of the cashew nut. Oh,
yeah?
But my favourite nut would probably be pecan.
Pecan nuts?
Pecan nuts. Sounds so wrong.
I know. Pecan nuts?
Don't peek at the nuts, Azul.
I'll peek at your nuts.
No, don't. Okay, I'm stuck in a small room with this man. Someone help me. If you can hear me, please help.
SOS.
Yeah,
No,
I just realised I said pecan. When you said pecan nuts, that sounds really wrong. So I like pecan.
Nut.
The pecan nut. This sounds like a move.
Well,
like the peak and then nut. I don't know what the
let's not. I know what that would mean, and let's not get into that.
Okay.
So we've established that Alex likes peeking at nuts, and I like cashew nuts. Cashew nuts. Salted cashew nuts are nice, much better than peeking at nuts. But regardless,
I'm scarred.
Moving on.
I don't like looking at nuts.
So Alex,
yes.
What do you think of your name?
Yeah, it's cool. Actually, that brings me to a time. There's a weird time in life. Teenage years. It's a weird time as any. Well, weirder. For many, it's the weirdest time. And I had a moment, 5 minutes, where I was saying my name out loud, alone in a room, as you do when you're a teenager, Yeah. And wait, that's sounding wrong. No,
Yeah.
No. I was saying my name out loud, and then it sounded just really weird. I kept saying Alex. Alex. And it just sounded like really weird that was a name. And that was my name.
So let me get this straight. When you were a teenager, you
Yes.
assumed it was the norm to say your name out loud multiple times, again and again, in a room closed off.
No, I just did it once. I was in a room by myself and I started thinking about my name. I was like, it's kind of weird. And I started saying it out loud, Alex. And it's like, that sounds really weird.
Just sounds
Yeah.
like a dream, and it's like, Alex.
Yeah, now that I mentioned, I did go through some weird times as a teenager. So, yeah, I did say my name.
A lot.
Yes. I could take this to a really weird place, but I won't. Because it's already sort of bordered on that. And
Yes.
let's move along. But I do like my name. Yeah.
Okay, let's examine that and move on from all the weird comments that we each made about each other.
Oh, we're going to leave that in for your entertainment because that's what we're just here for people's entertainment. But
We
we're
are
not.
merely figureheads of your entertainment.
Yes, we're here to entertain and hopefully give you something to take away from this that applies to your life.
Shock horror.
I know. Hopefully, by the end of this episode, you will have taken something away that you can apply to your life. But so let's carry on. So my name.
Yes.
Yeah.
Why do you like it?
I don't know. I mean, just slightly fond of it. Yeah. I mean, I'm not like, oh, woo, my name's Alex. Oh my gosh, I love my name so much. My name's Alex. Oh my gosh. I'm not like hugely about it, but I mean, I'm not partial to any other name. I don't see another name. I'm like, oh, I'm envious of that name. I want that name. I'm not too
Right.
bothered. It's just a name. But yeah, I quite like that name.
Okay, that's interesting.
I like my middle name too. So yeah.
Rupert?
Wow, that would be a great middle name.
Yeah.
No,
What is your middle name?
James.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah.
I really need to remember this.
Yeah, I don't even know your middle name.
Let's keep it like that.
I know your real first name, but I don't know your middle name.
I go by many names, Alex.
You
I
do.
go by many
You
names.
do, mysterious one.
So I brought up your name because there's a lot of I'm sure you've heard of the adage, you are what you read or you are what you eat and stuff like that. You are what you X, Y, Z.
Well, if you were what you eat, Azul, what would you be?
I would be a burrito. Because I just ate a burrito.
No, isn't that something? You know what? I think we've all taken away something from that statement that we can apply to our own lives. So thank you for tuning. I'm kidding. Okay, so yeah, carry on. So,
Well, see, it's kind of a pervasive idea in human culture that you are what you read or eat, and it's that idea goes back quite a while back in time. And like the implication is that you need to read really good things so that you're a really good person, or you need to eat really healthy because you'll be a healthy person. And sure, there's truth in it, but I mean, just because you read smut doesn't mean you're going to be the personification of smut.
no, but then, it affects you psychologically in quite a number of detrimental ways.
Sure, in the case of smut.
If we were like avidly into that, yeah.
Yes,
I mean,
yes,
it's been
yes.
proven. But,
No, that's fair.
Yeah. What are you saying, Azul?
Well, no, smut was I
I'm just teasing him.
Well, the idea, and I'm glad that you actually brought that up because there's an idea, and this hasn't been proven beyond the point of no return.
Okay.
But there's an idea that your name makes who you are.
Right.
This goes to such a far-reaching point that it becomes disturbing once you actually contemplate the full meaning of what that statement is. Your name creates who you are, or your name gives life to who you are, or you become your name, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're probably wondering, what the hell is this guy going on about?
Yeah.
Which is fair. Until I'll bring this idea to you. So there was a study done. Oh, I love my studies.
Yeah, me too.
By the Hebrew University a few years ago, by a Dr. Yonat Zwebner. Again, hard words. I truly apologize for
It's
all
a gangster
Jewish.
donut.
Well, it's a Jewish
It's a
name.
Yonut.
It could be Yonah. I don't know. Maybe the T is silent.
Yeah, it could be.
Could
I
be Yonah.
don't know. I'm of Jewish heritage myself, but I have no idea about Hebrew.
Yonat Zwebner. It was Zwebner. Zwebu. So
Zwebner? Got to say it more like a Jew.
Zwebner.
Zwebner.
Yonat Zwebner.
Zwebner.
Okay, now that we've made this name weird.
Okay.
Moving on.
Zwebner.
So he experimented on the idea that you become your name by essentially, I think this was done in Israel, and in France or to a French-speaking populace as well as an Israeli populace. So this doctor gave the participants pictures of people, facial portraits, and then they were given 4 names, and you were asked to choose what you thought this person's name was.
Well, that's interesting because I always find like even at parties and stuff, you might be with your friends, you might see someone, they're like, oh, there goes James, and you'd be like, you know what, James looks like a Rupert.
You do, don't you?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I've had a lot of times when somebody's told me, oh, his name is Charlotte, and I think,
his name is Charlotte.
her name is Charlotte.
Oh,
and
okay.
I think, she doesn't look like a Charlotte, she looks like a Rupert. Which begs the question, but let's move on.
Yeah, okay, moving along, yeah.
So the idea is, Alex, are you your name or is your name you? Or did your name create who you are? Because clearly we all as human beings, if we were to extrapolate the evidence in the study, and bear in mind the study, as far as I know, has not been replicated, and it should be taken with a grain of salt until it's been replicated in different cultures and different situations and so on. But if it is correct, and it has been heralded as correct as far as I can tell, as in there hasn't been like a major rebuke of the paper so far, then human beings have an inherent capacity to guess the names of individuals. And there can only be 2 conclusions from this. Either A, human beings somehow can see children and then name those children how they imagine those children will be when they're adults, or we become our names in some way, or our names affect how we look.
Well, I think I only partially agree with that because, I mean, for a lot of spiritual people today, and people who believe in numerology, a name is chosen very carefully because of what each letter has a number, and then it adds up to a certain number, and that actually has certain meanings and connotations. So, yeah, people who really believe in numerology are very careful about choosing names for their children because it evokes certain qualities and even might, I think, draw certain experiences for someone with that name. So, for them, a name is quite an important thing. But I would argue that no, a name has nothing to do with who I am.
Interesting.
Maybe it might affect some aspects, but it's not me. My name isn't me. My name's the name is just part of. I'm subscribed to Eastern philosophy here and religion, but the name is just a label. It's not me. It's not who I am. It's just a self-image, and a whole self-image and a whole ego has been created around this name, and a lot of people react quite strongly to hearing that, as I did at first, because we're strongly entrenched in an identity, we've a self-image, a thought about ourselves, and that gets shattered when you start to realise, hey, actually, I'm not my name. Who is this I behind the name? I mean, there's someone behind that name, and so I still firmly in that camp, even though, of course, language influences how we see things, and a name doesn't define a person, strangely.
Right.
I think it's not
Strangely.
who you really are.
Right.
It might say certain things about you, but it's not who you really are. I think what this can tell us is that it doesn't matter what labels you have associated with you in your life, you're never trapped by them. You can always be freed of them. You're more than that. You're beyond that.
It is an interesting point that you bring. So the doctor in this case, he coined this term, this phenomenon as the Dorian Gray effect after the eponymous
Oh, I love that.
Oscar Wilde anti-hero Dorian Gray.
So Dorian Gray was the guy, just in case anyone's listening that's not sure about Dorian Gray. It's a really cool story. It's about the man who's wouldn't age, but then he had a painting of himself, and that painting would age, and that was like the secret, his power to like living eternally, right? So then he would look at his painting and it looks like really old, but then he would always be eternally young. Really interesting concept.
Yeah, and so he would go on doing like really bad things, and his portrait would show the effects of it, but he wouldn't. He would just remain young.
Wow, so creepy. It's so cool. I've got to read it.
Yeah, it is a good read, I must admit. So he coined the Dorian Gray effect because there has been evidence in the past that imply that your name, or at least a correlation between name and, say, your temper, for example.
Right.
Or name and, say, certain levels of your genes or hormones. Again, it's a correlation, not a causation. You cannot definitively say your name causes you to be short-tempered or your name causes you to be lacking of this hormone or something of the sort.
But maybe it has a certain influence upon the psyche or something.
It could, yes.
Okay.
And that's the idea that scientists are going through and looking into. Like, taking into account spirituality and mysticism and so on, names have always been very important because there's this idea that names give an individual power. And so there's the idea of like a true name or the idea of like a second name or a nickname. And all of these names are like pseudonyms, for example. All these names have different functions because they identify you in different ways, right?
And I guess the most famous of all, in Western religion, is being the name of God. In Judaism, it's very holy and sacred. It's never uttered.
Yeah.
I only just found out. It was only uttered once a year in a special ceremony in the Great Temple in Jerusalem. But yeah, that of course doesn't happen anymore because it was destroyed.
And like we can go as far as fiction and fantasy, like Harry Potter with He Who Must Not Be Named. All of these ideas, as far as history goes, shows that human culture has had a fascination with names and an inherent idea that names embody an individual or like the true beholder of a name has power over it and so on. It's quite an interesting idea. Does a name really have an effect on us? I mean, we know for a fact that it has an effect at the societal level. So there have been studies that shown that if in America apply for a job with a Caucasian sounding name, you have a high chance of getting a job versus like an African American sounding name.
That's horrible. Yeah. That is really terrible. But you know what? If I reckon, are you sure it's not just that? Like, for example, you're called Chad. I'd be very angry if I was called Chad. You're surely just not angry that they called something they called Apple or Potato.
Probably.
You get all these weird celebrity names now.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. It's terrible. Like
Balloon.
Northwest, was it or?
Northwest. Yeah.
Yeah.
You just grow up angry. Like, why am I called this?
Yeah. So it could have an effect like that with anger and short-temperedness. Truly.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know New Zealand has banned a list of names like Satan and the
Really?
at symbol. Yeah, they officially banned these names because people were asking for it too much.
Are you kidding me? People asking to like someone was trying to call their child Satan.
Yep. Also God. Also like the number 9, I think, was one of them, or like NO full stop 9.
You're kidding me?
Yeah, there's a whole list.
Weird.
Yeah.
No wonder these children would grow up angry. If they were called these things,
It's amazing. It's amazing how a name, and understandably a lot of people go wild with naming people and so on, but it all comes down to you have to live with your name unless you go get it changed for as far as you can tell. And so it must have some level of psychological effect.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I'm sure. Because of the associations with that name.
Yeah.
Whether they come from historic ones, like, for example, mine, they say, comes from Alexander the Great. So maybe people who are called Alex are naturally great. I'm just biased here. Maybe we're just cocky too.
No, that's fair.
And also people we see around us, right? Let's just say you meet a Sean and he's a bit of a dick.
Now Sean's always going to be dick.
Now Sean's going to have that association. If it is the first Sean you've met, then you might, unless you have a lot of experiences that, your mind might naturally just, if you know someone's called Sean, might just start being a bit judgy about someone called Sean, which is unfortunate. Because it could be a lovely Sean. Right, yeah. No, that's totally fair. And so there's this idea. So a journalist named Adam Alter coined this term as the linguistic Heisenberg principle. That sounds pretty epic. So the Heisenberg principle is a principle in physics that states that you cannot know the position and velocity of a particle at the same time if you measure it, even from a theoretical point of view. Okay. But forgetting that, because that's quantum physics and so on, the idea behind a linguistic Heisenberg principle is that as soon as you label something, you change how it is perceived. Well, yeah, because as you showed us before, how language really affects how you perceive things. So I can see that. Yeah. So okay. Alex, if you were to change your name now and then go meet somebody else, there is a high chance that they would react differently from if you were Alex and you met those exact same people. Well, actually, I have an alter ego. Oh yeah. Actually, I have two. Do go on. I'm gonna admit this is confession. This is a confession. I feel like I'm in a safe space. So actually, my friends jokingly called me Axel. And I made up an alter ego, and Axel had certain connotations in my mind, and what would Axel act like, and right, like he's quite bold, he's quite he doesn't care what people think so much, and there's all these things. So I started acting like he's a bad boy, and it's called Axel. I think about cars and stuff. And
Yep.
Yeah, so there's all this again, all these images, and I created a whole character.
Yeah,
called
there you
Axel.
go.
And also there was oh yeah, no, let's leave it at that.
So in philosophy, this idea is called the philosophy of names. It comes down to proper names. So a proper name is defined as a name of a specific person or a place. And it's a name that is ordinarily taken as a unique identifier of a reference, so of an object that you refer to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense.
So Socrates, for example, like Socrates is the Greek philosopher who lived in 300 BC or something of the sort.
Yeah.
And so the proper name Socrates is Socrates, and the referent of the proper name Socrates is the individual Socrates.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So in the philosophy of linguistics or in the philosophy of language, you come into situations where you have basically quite a simple sentence such as Socrates is a philosopher.
Okay.
So you and I and anyone else aware of Socrates and anyone else listening now knows that Socrates is a philosopher, right?
Yeah.
But what about the word Socrates conveys to us the meaning that he is Socrates, the Socrates that lived?
It's the association with it, right?
But how does that happen?
Because we've been told about a man called Socrates who was a philosopher. So that association's instantly, the first connection's made. You never heard that name before. And that's an association's made in your mind.
Without knowing, Alex, you are basically subscribing to what linguists and linguistic philosophers call the casual theory of names, which states that the very first time the proper name is stated, it refers to that individual. And then through social situations and community, that name is used again and again and again. And henceforth, generation to generation, we have that inkling, that connection that it is that individual that name belongs to.
Yeah, okay.
This theory was coined by an individual called Saul Kripke in his book Naming and Necessity. But the idea behind that is it's just one of the many theories that go behind, names. I imagine this is what you subscribe to?
No, because I was actually thinking that there's no absolute.
Yeah?
So even though, I mean, it is, I do subscribe to it in a sense, but then I also disagree with it in a sense because of how I feel about names being a label for it's not
right.
really is something, but yeah, how it comes to, the feelings. Yeah, so ignore me, yeah. So sort of.
It was a good segue to the philosophy of names, so
yeah,
by all means, let's not ignore you. So Kripke's assertion, which is what you essentially said, is that somebody states a name and then it's through social construct or through community, it's brought to a point where you recognize Socrates as being that individual who lived in 300 BC. And so it's through a community that the meaning within the word Socrates has come to you.
Okay.
Because the word Socrates in and of itself does not have a meaning. If I asked you to define Socrates, what would you define it as?
Now I would define it as the philosopher who lived in Greece a long time ago. One of the founders of Western philosophy.
See, the idea behind that is that you couldn't say, for example, the definition of Socrates is the man who lived.
It's not a definition. Well, it's not a definition. Well, it's just it's the name of a man who maybe other people had that name in Greece, as I'm sure they did.
Yeah,
but he just happened to be one of the most famous of them.
And this is where, exactly. And this is where linguists and philosophers alike just scratch their heads and wonder, what is the definition of Socrates?
What do you mean, what's the definition of Socrates?
Well, each word in a sentence needs to have a meaning, right?
Yeah, but the thing is, we have to think about the reason why we use language is that the reason why we have the name is that so I can, for daily life, you're Azul. So then I can interact with you and say, oh, hey, Azul! And then you can turn around and then we can interact and we can go about our lives instead of imagine how hard it would be if no one had any names.
No, you're totally right.
Yeah, so I don't think it has any... But I mean, sometimes names come with meanings. For example, my brother's called Benjamin, and that means, ironically, he's my older brother, and ironically that means youngest brother I think in Hebrew. So they do have meanings, but they're used as a way to be able to identify people.
Yeah, and so that's actually, you bring the next definition.
Oh, great.
Of proper names. So
okay.
It's not the conclusive end of this discussion, but it is one of the more accepted definitions of what a proper name is.
Okay.
It's essentially called, this theory is called the direct reference theory, which essentially states that proper names, for example, Azul or Alex, exist in their own class of words, and these words, their only function is to act as references to the referent.
Okay.
So the only function of Alex is to be an
An
word
identifier.
of you.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
essentially what's accepted as more or less the common acceptance of nowadays philosophers.
Cool. Well, the thing is, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
But I've got a question for you. Because your name is Azul, right?
Yes.
But it's not your real name.
This is true.
Your real name's right?
We're going to cut that out.
Well, wait, that's the thing. But I think it's interesting since we're talking about names. Why are you choosing? Yeah, what's the philosophy behind you choosing Azul over? What's your thinking behind that?
I think that has to do more with psychology than philosophy.
Okay.
I think, I don't know. It is, back in the day, I must have made a conscious decision to refer to myself as Azul.
You don't remember?
I don't remember for the life of me. I nowadays, if somebody asks me why I refer to myself as Azul, I just say that is really pronounced Azul and people couldn't pronounce it, and so
Oh, really?
I
Is it
pronounce it
actually?
Azul.
Is
No,
that the
it's not.
case? No.
no, it's really not. But
Oh.
the idea behind it is, I think I found myself... I mean, why can't people, just on a bit of a rant or a tangent, why can't people name themselves? I feel like the ideal world, the utopia that is or should be, is where you give it a name like Boy A or Boy B or Boy 23 when you're a kid, or Girl 23 or Neuter 23 or X23 if we're going for non-gender normative like names.
Yeah.
But the idea is like you're given a default number when you're born, and you're
What?
referred to by
Drab?
the number. But when you want, at any point in your life, you can decide, okay, this is the name I want.
Yeah, but then the thing is, you don't come out talking, do you? People need to refer to you. But yeah, then you're saying just call him Boy 23. Okay, I see.
Yeah, so I could just call you 23.
But that's rather...
Drab.
Yeah. And again, this brings to mind numerology and how, a name can actually influence a person's personality is the belief in numerology. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's what we were saying with the Jewish... Oh, actually, that's a very good point, because numerology is a predominantly Jewish tradition, isn't it?
Is it? I don't know.
I think...
I don't know. I don't know modern.
It's Hebrew,
numerology.
sorry.
Okay.
Hebrew has a very strong connection with numerology because...
It does, because the Hebrew letters, right?
Yes.
They all refer to certain numbers, so
and that's
maybe
why
it must have had
God's,
an
like,
influence.
the true name of God has a certain, unspeakable, amazing symmetry or something of the sort. I don't know much about Hebrew.
I know, yeah, the name of God is it's actually quite a beautiful thing, because it actually sounds like the same as taking an inhalation and an exhalation.
Right.
It sounds similar to that, and I could say it, but it's Yahweh.
Oh, right, of course.
Yeah, so Yahweh is the name of God in Judaism.
Yes.
My apologies to any devout Jewish listeners, but it's the same as and actually it's a meditation that can be done, where you just focus on breathing through your mouth, and you as you can try it as you breathe in. So it sounds like you can hear it. It sounds like breath, and that's quite beautiful, because then as it's told in the Bible, God breathed man into life as a breath. Yeah, it's really stunning. But that's just a little tangent. Yeah.
No, that's fair. It comes back to naming yourselves, right? So
Yeah.
do you think, well, if you were taught about numerology, would you still be able to name yourself? I would say so. Something that you believe is good.
Yeah, but I don't know. I feel like, what if it's... Part of me think, what if a name is destined? But then I think of those people who try to call their children Satan.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, maybe not. But I don't know. I guess I think what I've discovered from our conversation is that actually I have an inherent, at least a little bit of a spiritual view of a name. There's almost something sacred about it.
Yes.
Which is weird, because I know it's just a label. but there's just something, maybe there's a little bit of something to it, maybe.
I mean, it's the linguistic Heisenberg principle, really. Once you label something, it changes how you perceive it, which is,
Yeah.
I guess, to answer your question about why I go by Azul, it's something that I created out of my own conscious will. And so I have control over how it's perceived. It does not have any predominant or it does not have any connotations of being anything or the other, while a normal name would.
Well, so then that's the thing. So why did the name have a negative connotation for you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Or it has connotations that aren't within my control, shall we say.
Okay.
Because, like, Alex itself, so the word, like, imagine if you were named Adolf Hitler,
Oh, shit.
but you were the brightest, nicest girl to ever live.
Yeah, but people would perceive you.
Yes.
Let's just say in this world that a girl could be called Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
In this odd world, and then, yeah, but people would perceive her in a certain way.
Yeah, and
obviously.
not to say that my name's anything like Adolf Hitler, but the idea is that it's something that is out of your control, right?
Right.
And so I think when it comes down to it, the reason why I choose to go by Azul is because I chose that, and it is more me than any other name that I can give myself.
Right, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually there's a similar thing in some meditation traditions where you're given a person has a particular mantra, and it's a particularly unique one for a certain type of person, and the teacher can recognize and give this special mantra to a person that's unique.
Right.
That's unique to only certain number of people. So everyone has like a different type.
Yes.
There's a whole thing behind it, philosophy behind that. So again, there's a sacredness of words in tradition.
I think with that, we'll draw to a close of this week's podcast.
Okay.
So, given everything that we've discussed, names, how we are our names or we are not our names, how names have an influence over us that we can only imagine, how names change how we perceive things, how labels cannot determine what we see and what we don't because the labels themselves have a power over our perception. What did you take from today's discussion?
Well, what I took away is, actually, I realised that I do have more of a belief in the sacredness of names than I thought. So, like, I wouldn't be comfortable with the idea of naming myself. I don't know, I think it's something kind of like a beautiful gift, isn't it? As long as I don't call you Satan, for goodness sake. Who calls their children Satan, honestly? But anyway, or even Apple or Northwest. What? But that's besides the point.
Yes.
Like, I think it's almost like a gift. Because a name comes with certain things, comes with certain associations. And, we all love these mugs and things as gifts, right? That have people's names and then what it means. And, we're fascinated. We love that. Yeah, so it's almost like it's quite a nice gift. So I sort of recognize the sacredness of a name, or how special it is to have a name.
Right.
But at the same time, I still stick firmly to the camp that it's just a label. It's not who I am. I am beyond labels.
Yeah.
Because a label is just a label for a thing, but that label you can't confuse the label for the thing itself.
That's fair.
It's like going to a clothing store and then, you got the label, like, I don't know, Zara on it.
Yeah.
And then you mistake the clothing for the Zara label, so you just rip off the label and walk and say, yeah, I got it. It's not the actual thing,
Yeah.
It's it was a poor example, but... Yeah.
No, it's good. And my conclusion is very similar as well, I think. Before doing the research for this episode and before doing this episode with you, I was under the impression that, names had a fair amount of power over our choices in life and so on. But I didn't really understand how or to what extent it did have a power over certain decisions and so on. So it's surprising how being named Bob could make you a Bob, versus being named Derek, making you grow up to be a Derek.
Damn, I'm sorry, Derek.
I am so sorry, Derek. Derek's
joking.
a wonderful name.
We're joking.
We are totally joking.
We're joking. Or not.
Or not. That's for you to know, Derek, and no one else. But it is an interesting idea behind how far a name can have an effect on yourself and on reality, really. And I think the one thing that I would take home from this is to be aware of how much, for myself at least, a name can have such a effect on me. Like, if I read a name, it would definitely cause me to think of this person as certain things.
Yeah.
Without me realizing it as well.
Yeah. And I just thought of something else before we close, is that actually words, there's a lot of traditions where words are very sacred and powerful, and you have to be careful with what you say.
Exactly.
For example, I think it's in the yoga tradition, in the yoga tradition, that it's very important that you always speak the truth, because then that means your words have more power. When you do say something and proclaim it, it could become true, and you can be more of an influencer in your life by doing that. And also, how a lot of people today, even with the modern spiritual movements, is that a lot of people are afraid of words and vibrations. And actually, we should add this in. And I just thought this is very. Have you heard of Masaru Emoto?
No.
He wrote an amazing work called Hidden Messages in the Water, and it became very popular. So what they researched is that they had water, and then they would, I don't know exactly how the experiment worked, but then they would say certain words, they experimented with different words, and the water would be frozen, and they'd have ice crystals. Interestingly enough, words with negative connotations made very ugly crystals,
Oh, wow.
but words with beautiful words like love, they said love and gratitude were the ones that created the most beautiful crystals. And they have pictures of them. I recommend getting the book or looking online. You can see pictures of what the crystals look like when they from the water that's frozen, when you speak the words love and gratitude to it, and it actually creates these beautiful designs, absolutely stunning. So I think words have a certain power and effect, and that's why a lot of people in different traditions are very, very careful about their words and what they say about how it can affect the world around them, and how we should be careful with our words because they contain certain power. And actually, maybe that disproves maybe me, because I thought, oh no, it's just a label, right?
Yeah.
But then it's saying, well, maybe it is just a label, but it can have a certain effect on the world.
And I guess with that, we can finally answer Shakespeare's age-old question: what's in a name? A pretty damn lot, apparently.
Yeah, a hell of a lot. Hey guys, that's us for another episode. Thank you all for listening. We hope we gave you a smile and something to think about.
If you like this episode, please give us a rating on Apple.
Every 5-star rating goes a long way to help us keep going and reach more people. We really appreciate all your support.
You can find us on Facebook as Confuddled Podcast.
On Twitter at Confuddled_pod. That's CONFUDDLED_POD.
And on Instagram at Confuddled_podcast. Or just email us at confuddledpodcast@gmail.com.
We love hearing from you. Share your comments, queries, ideas, suggestions, lightbulb moments.
And your deepest, darkest secrets.
Maybe not.
So get in touch.
Okay, until next week.
Yeah, we've been waiting for